Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's edition of Weekend Waypoints, production of SEC Extra and D1Baseball.com. Joe Healy here to recap the week here in Omaha at the College World Series. Just a programming note, tomorrow's episode will be more of a preview of the finals, just, because we don't have any games today, they start tomorrow, and I'm doing a show today and tomorrow. Today will be more recap. We'll spend some time on Kentucky and Florida, the seasons that were for them, their eliminations. And then tomorrow we'll spend a little more time previewing. So that's a little bit of the lay of the land. So if you're jumping in here and if by the end of this you're wondering why we're not really talking much about Tennessee or Texas A&M, that is why. We will touch on them tomorrow as we preview the finals. So another all SEC final that's becoming commonplace here at the College World Series. Seems to be happening more often than not. But we're going to have a new champion. I think that's exciting. And it does show the depth of the SEC, right? It's not, there was a time in SEC baseball, you go back a few decades where, LSU was doing a lot of the heavy lifting for the SEC in terms of competing for and winning championships. And that's just not the case anymore. LSU got another one last year, but, you had first-time champion with Mississippi State, first-time champion with Ole Miss. In the last 10 years, Vanderbilt became a first-time champion. So, it's an opportunity here for Tennessee or Texas A&M to get one, and it kind of puts your program on another plane, if you will. So great opportunity here for both programs. The two SEC teams that are out, Kentucky finishes 1-2. They got that dramatic walk-off win over NC State to start the tournament, which is, a great memory. That's good. I mean, Mitchell Daly, the biggest hit in program history, right? I mean, I think that's kind of inarguable, and that's going to be remembered forever, certainly by Mitchell Daly. So, that was a cool moment. So I'm glad they got that moment. Two losses after that, a lost A&M where, Ryan Prager was just great. Not a lot they could have done about it. And then, got blown out by Florida. I guess that was Wednesday morning. And just, it got away from them early. Dom Nyman didn't make it out of the first. And then they couldn't quite stop the bleeding. To their credit, it hadn't yet got totally out of hand. I think it was 7-2, and then it was 7-4, and then it was, so it ended up 15-4. So they obviously just couldn't get enough stops, to use basketball terminology there. But so a disappointing end that it ended with a blowout, and that there wasn't a more competitive contest. But in the big picture, program changer for Kentucky. And I wrote about that after the game. I have that piece up on the website if you want to go read that. A program-altering season for Kentucky. It's a program that has often been defined by what it doesn't have versus a lot of the rest of the SEC. And look, some of those things aren't going to change. They can't change the weather and the fact that it kind of sucks in Lexington in February, right? They can't change the fact that they're not sitting on a talent hotbed locally the way Florida is, the way Georgia is, the way Texas A&M is. Those are things they can't change. But here's what they have changed. They beautiful stadium, beautiful facility that puts them right up there with anybody else in the SEC. Fan support now. We'll see if it sticks next year. I think next year's team takes a step back. Obviously, that almost kind of goes without saying, just because, look, you you reached a high bar this season. So does that stick? I'd like to think it does, but they were pushing 8,000 fans at Kentucky Proud Park, so that has changed. That's what they have going for them, and they can no longer be thought of as a program where you can say, well, you just really can't go to Omaha there. You can't win big there. Well, they just did. I mean, 2 years in a row they've won big there. Like, let's not undervalue the super regional 2 years ago, right? And now they've been to 3 supers in 7 full seasons, if you count the one back in, I'd have to do the math, but if you count the one back in 2017, so like you can win big there. Is it easy? No. Like, are there places that have more going for them? Yes, but the proof is in the pudding now for Kentucky. And so I'll be interested to see what happens moving forward. One of the challenges when you get to this level is you're going to have access to better players, which is great. 100% great. but how do you, kind of balance like, hey, okay, we're going to be able to bring in some more talented players here, but we still want to take our kind of guys, guys that fit what we're doing, and that is a little bit of a balance. It's a good problem to have, right? You want the options, but you do have to still focus on taking guys that fit what you're trying to do, and it'll be interesting to see how Kentucky balances that. They're taking a big portal class again. A lot of guys already committed. I've written about those guys in my various transfer portal updates on the site. Got another one coming today, by the way, Friday, June 21st. So a big transfer class. They've done a really good job with that. I don't think that'll change. I think there'll be a big group of contributors from that transfer class. It's an older transfer class again. They're focusing again on older guys, and like that worked, right? Ryan Nicholson, Mitchell Daly, Ty Crittenberger, Trey Poozer, right? And names I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but that's just Cameron O'Brien. That's just been like a successful thing for them. So I think that will continue. But are they able to bring in more blue chip freshmen, right? Because ultimately, your program players, the guys who come through the program year after year, those have to be the backbone of your program, especially in the SEC. And they've had that, right? I mean, Devin Burks, guy who'd been there a while, Nolan McCarthy, obviously, to some degree, Ryan Waldschmidt, right? I mean, he played his freshman year at Charleston Southern, but he's been at Kentucky 2 years now, which is, longer than he was at Charleston Southern. So, but anyways, the guys you bring in that are going to be there multiple years have to be the backbone of the deal. But transfers can really help, and they've proven that. So I want to make sure I give Kentucky its flowers for the season it had. Like I said, a program-altering season. No longer the only team in the SEC to not make it to the College World Series. And yes, that includes Missouri, by the way. Now, that was a long time ago for Missouri, so we could have the discussion about whether that actually counts. But hey, in terms of the record book, Missouri has been there. So Kentucky no longer the lone outlier there that had not made it. They have made it. Florida, who eliminated Kentucky. We'll talk about them in a second. Let me flip over to the comments here. Coach Sean Miller. So anybody else sees this, was anyone else forced to create a channel in order to chat? Is that a YouTube change? I don't know off the top of my head, Sean. But hopefully that's not something that keeps people from being able to interact here. Making my third trip to Omaha this week, tomorrow morning. Glad to still be in this thing despite the full training table. Yeah, that's trainers, A&M's trainers, getting a lot of work this week, earning their keep, if you will. That's obviously going to be a big storyline moving forward into this championship series. How A&M deals with that. I mean, the big one's Laviolette, right? Because we the other injuries you can't do anything about. Braden Montgomery, Shane Sadeo, et cetera. And Hayden Schott just kind of is what it is, right? Like he's just going to be dealing with that knee injury the rest of the way. But Laviolette's the one where they're kind of, depending on how they manage it, maybe it gets a little better, maybe it doesn't. We'll have to see. That's the big one there. And kudos to you, Sean, for making multiple trips back and forth to Omaha. Interesting thing. We'll talk about this here in a second, but the Gator rotation bullpen should be stupid good next year. UK looks to need to really refill the cupboard and hit at a high rate. Yeah, UK is just going to have a lot of rebuilding to do. Just an older team. But yeah, we'll talk about Florida in a minute. But yeah, they don't look now. But that's that. It has a chance to be a classic Florida team from what we understand to be a classic Florida team, right? Like pitching at just a crazy high level, prospects all over the place. And I think there's some element of Kevin O'Sullivan, who wants to get back to that, and when you have Caglione, it's easy to kind of build a lineup out and say like, look, we're just I'm going to mash the baseball. That's great. And in today's SEC, you kind of have to do that. That has to be a tool in your toolbox. But I do think there's some part of Kevin O'Sullivan that's trying to reshape the pitching staff and get back a little bit to their roots when they were really cooking with gas in 2016, 17, 18, where it was guys who could sink the ball and get the ball on the ground. And it's still good stuff, still prospects. But, guys who were doing a little more of that versus elevating. So we'll see. But yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, they should be really good. Nicholas Doherty, morning, Joe. Where do you think Christian Moore goes in the draft after this insane season and postseason? Well, I'll say first that I'm not a draft expert or a prospect guy, but first half of the first round sounds about right. Maybe he leaks into the 20s. I think I've seen some mocks that have had them there, but yeah, certainly he's only helped himself with his run over the second half of the regular season and into the postseason. So yeah, he will not last long in the draft. He's going to be a great addition to a system, and I wouldn't be surprised if one team falls in love and ends up taking him a little bit earlier than he's being mocked. We'll see. Jordan asks, "Morning, Joe. We know our pitching matchup yet? I do not. As I am recording this, the preview press conference they do the day before the finals start is happening. So stay locked to your local the beat guys. For Tennessee, Mike Wilson, Ryan Shumpert, Ben McKee, Eric Kane. For Texas A&M, Ryan Broninger, Travis Brown, those guys. They'll have that information because I can guarantee you they're being asked. So they'll have that for you, but I am not yet aware of the pitching matchup. Sean, back to UF. This will be a good jumping off point for us to talk about UF. Are they focusing on pitching to the detriment of hitting? Cags at 415 and then everyone else at 250. That's not sustainable, is it? It is not. But the interesting thing about that is that a lot of that is the guys took steps back. And I don't know if that's an indictment of Florida or just that's baseball kind of thing, because Cade Curlin took a step back after he was excellent as a freshman. And this year he still hit for some power, but I think he ended up hitting around between 240 and 250. And, Colby Shelton took a step back from his freshman year at Alabama. So there were enough steps back to where you go, is it, and especially the guys who were at Florida 2 years ago that took steps back this past year or this year at Florida, those, so I don't know what to make of that. So maybe Sean is, I guess, the answer. But maybe might be the answer, but it's just hard to know. Because Curlin could come back and have his best year yet, or it could just be that his freshman year ends up being his peak offensively, right? Sometimes that just happens when there's not as much pressure as when you're supposed to be one of the guys in the lineup. So we'll see. But yeah, I mean, I think certainly there's a porque no los dos kind of deal where it's why can't we do both well? And Florida could, right? If Curlin and Shelton, et cetera, had hit as well as they had the previous year, they would have been one of the most lethal combinations of pitching and offense at their best. And maybe that's what we get next year. They could be a juggernaut. Cags is going to be gone, Shelton's going to be gone, but if they get steps forward from other guys in the lineup and bring in some impact guys, they've done some of that in the portal. Kyle Jones from Stetson, I think, has a chance to be electric. There's a chance that we see that next year. And that's a good segue. We'll talk about Florida. They eliminated Kentucky, then went up against A&M. And Justin Lampkin pitched well. It was another start where Justin Lampkin kind of exceeded expectations. And then, A&M was able to bring in some bullpen guys to keep Florida at bay. But I think as much as anything else, Florida looked a little out of gas to me. Not just, and that's who's to say, right? It's hard to say what percentage was what A&M was doing. What percentage was Florida being out of gas. But, even Brandon Neely, who was on pretty good rest, came in and just wasn't quite as sharp. Now, he kind of rounded into form as the outing went on, but he just wasn't quite as sharp. Florida had to go back to Jake Clemente for the second time in the day. He pitched in the morning game too. So that was, to me, kind of a little bit of a red flag of they think they're kind of at the end of the rope in terms of what they have available on the mound. So, and this is going to be a weird season to evaluate in the big picture for Florida, right? I mean, they ended up where we thought they'd end up, or at least where I thought they'd end up, which is in Omaha. But man, they took a circuitous route to get there. And so if you're a Florida fan, it's kind of this weird deal where, great, we made it to Omaha again. We were one of the last in this case, 3 teams standing. But do you celebrate the Omaha trip more, or do you bemoan the fact that, like, boy, we really kind of played with our food in the regular season, and if they lose, honestly, if they lose one more game during the regular season, they don't get in, I don't think. So, or they almost certainly don't get in. I mean, they were one of the last 4 in as it was. So you nearly missed the postseason altogether, and we'd be having a very different conversation if that was the case. So I don't know. If I was a Florida fan, I'm not sure exactly how I'd feel. Although I do know how I'd feel about the coming season. I think they've got a chance to be really good. Think about all of the times that Sully or anybody else was like, this Florida team got off to a slow start and started floundering because the pitching is really young. And some guys, Luke McNeely had a stretch mid-season where he was really, really effective out of the bullpen. Liam Peterson had some really good starts down the stretch, and ultimately he fell off in the postseason. But late in the regular season, he turned a corner. So think about, we're talking about McNeely and Peterson coming back as sophomores, and there's a whole group of freshmen who had some moments but didn't quite put it all together. I'm thinking of Frank Menendez, and Clemente is one of those guys. Grayson Smith, Robert Satin, Philpott, who pitched yesterday or a couple days ago. There's this whole group of freshmen that are going to be back, and not all of them will be markedly better. That's just not the way it works, right? Like, there's always going to be an outlier, but they should be better as a group, and they'll be more experienced. And Florida will lose some pieces on the mound as well, but that feels like those guys will make up the rotation next year, right? And Florida also is doing big game hunting in the portal. Like, so, we don't know exactly who they'll end up with there. But don't look now. I think it's going to be a dangerous pitching staff. The stuff is incredible. Like, and we knew that from I saw them in the fall, and I was like, man, these freshmen are like, 95 is like the minimum. Like, Frank Menendez is like the only one of the freshmen who wasn't just lighting up the radar gun. And so, it's big arms. So I'm excited to see what their development is, what next year looks like for that group. But in the meantime, like, for this year, again, mixed bag. I think you absolutely celebrate getting to Omaha. Any season that ends in Omaha can't be looked at as anything other than a success on the top line. But when you dig below that and you start to really evaluate it, you do wonder, why did so many of the offensive pieces take a step back? Why did it take so long, other than youth? Why did it take so long to get some of these younger pitchers online and get them going? And the answers to those questions, I think, are going to be key moving forward for Florida to have a better regular season in 2025, because we assume those young pitchers in particular will get better. But don't overlook the fact that for the most part, it's going to be sophomore pitchers who don't have a lot of experience. So there could still be growing pains. You don't anticipate nearly as many because they've now been through a full year in the program, but that could still be a part of it. So we'll obviously see. A couple more comments here. Sean Miller mentions UK here. My equal time to UK, 8 hitters, juniors or older. What underclassmen flash for them this year that are expected to step up, or will it be all transfers taking advantage of this Omaha run? I think it's going to be more the latter. Like, they really didn't have any really young hitters that were impact guys for them, at least that I can think of off the. If I'm forgetting someone can please jump in and correct me. But just kind of going around the diamond here, right? I mean, Nicholson, gone, older guy. Burks, older guy, has eligibility. We'll see what he does at catcher. Emilian Petre, he could get drafted. He's a third-year guy. Grant Smith is gone. Mitchell Daly is gone. Ryan Waldschmidt's going to be a first-round pick. McCarthy has a year to come back, but he's an older guy. James McCoy is a third-year guy. He's probably back because, he's super talented, but he's yet to put it all together. So yeah, you use Patrick Herrera, a decent bit, but Patrick Herrera is also a third-year guy. So yeah, they really didn't have big-time contributors among the younger players. Now, some of those guys will break through. I think Eli Small is probably a guy who becomes a full-time guy. He got some pinch hit at bats here and there. I think Caius Gargett, who saw some time when the infield was a little bit beat up. Daly was nicked up for part of the year. Grant Smith has been nicked up for basically the entire season. So Gargett got some time. So those are a couple guys I expect to be a part of it in some shape or form for Kentucky. But yeah, I don't think maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think the stars are going to come from that group. I think the transfers are going to have to be where it's at. And of course, Lucas Schramm, you mentioned him, Sean. Yeah, he's another one. And the stars are going to have to be mostly from transfers and veterans who come back, whether it's McCarthy or Burks if he comes back, McCoy, guys like that. So that's where it's going to have to come from. It's going to be an older team again, which, hey, that's worked for them. So it's not necessarily the worst way to go about it. It's just, as we know, a little bit of a high wire act. It's a little bit of a high wire act for, because if you don't hit on a high number of your transfers, there's a possibility you kind of crater a little bit, and then you've kind of had a lost season with a team that doesn't have that many young players that you can develop and look toward the next year. So you're kind of caught in this like spin cycle. But for the most part, Kentucky's done an excellent job. So until that doesn't work, I'm just going to assume that it's going to continue to work to some degree. Will it always end in Omaha? Of course not. But work can mean a lot of things. Collins Koch on X says Texas A&M loses, but also brings back a ton of talent with how great Schloss has hit the portal. Do you have any worries for them next season? Not really. I'd have to do a deep dive. I haven't. Yes. Sean says my Aggies living with transfers at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 spots in the roster. So ride it while you can, UK and A&M. Yeah, I think with the way they hit the portal, and look, they've already got, Wyatt Hensler might be the best transfer in the SEC. That's possible. Now he's going to have competition, but I mean, the Ivy League all-time home run leader. And if you think it's gone well with Jackson Appel and Hayden Schott, and I don't see how you could say anything except that it's gone well, I think Wyatt Hensler is going to be that same type of player. So I think that's great for A&M. The question is going to be for them, and we'll talk more A&M tomorrow, just as a heads up. And if you're watching this and you're wondering, why aren't you talking Tennessee and A&M? We're going to do more of that tomorrow morning because there's actually a game tomorrow. So we're focusing more on Kentucky, Florida, and just some general stuff here. Tomorrow we'll be more focused on the finals, just as a heads up if you're joining and wondering why we're not doing that. But Collins, to your question, I don't have any worries about them. I think they've established a really good floor, and they do big game hunting in the portal. They're in on a lot of high end guys, so I suspect they'll be just fine. I do wonder, what the pitching looks like. Prager's a third year guy, but he's a prospect, but he's more of a fringy guy. Like he's not a surefire, top 60, 90, maybe even 100 pick, right? So I'll be interested to see where he goes, what that means for A&M, because when you factor in some of the injuries, the fact that some of the guys they brought in are older guys, like Tanner Jones, for example, not older, but experienced guys, and that didn't go great all the time this season. So I'll just be interested generally to see what Max Weiner and that staff does with the pitching next year in a world where maybe they look to, because it'll be Weiner's second year, maybe they look to develop as opposed to leaning more heavily on the portal. But obviously we will see. Sean asked just a quick logistical question here. Portal closes July 3rd. Is that right? I believe that's correct. I would have to look at the exact days, but it's 45 days after the NCAA tournament is announced. So yeah, July 3rd sounds about right. Is there a fall portal window too? I believe there is in December. There's a window where you can get in, like if you got cut in the fall or what have you. Obviously, that's not going to be a big deal, but that does exist. But yeah, this portal closes July 3rd. So summer ball has started. Cape Cod League started this past week, or this week. So that started. Summer ball elsewhere here started. So we will probably have some surprise entrants in the coming days before the portal closes. But I am fascinated. And this is a conversation for a different day because we're already at about 25 minutes on this deal. But there's just not quite the headliners in the portal this year. There's some very good players. Don't be wrong. Many of them going to the SEC, but there's not a Tommy White. There's not a Billy Amick. There's not a Braden Montgomery. Now, remember, Braden Montgomery got in late last year, so that is something that could change. But that level of guy isn't in yet. The Paul Skeens, obviously, and we'll see. Maybe summer ball catalyzes some of that, and but I'd be fascinated if it doesn't change, and this year's a little less star-studded in the portal. I'll be interested to kind of ask around to coaches of, is that a one-off? Because it could be. Is that a one-off? Is that the portal stabilizing? Is it that teams are just doing a better job of re-recruiting their roster? Like, no one's getting caught off guard by transfers. That first couple of off seasons, teams were getting caught off guard, like, because they weren't used to having to re-recruit the roster, right? So guys were just kind of leaving, and like teams were getting caught flat-footed. That's not happening anymore. So maybe that's it. I don't know. So if it continues, that will be something I want to talk about with some folks this off season, and maybe write something. We'll see, depending on the answers I get. Jordan makes a good point here, and I agree. I still believe you have to have high school recruits as a foundation. Examples: A&M, LSU, Florida, Arkansas. Absolutely, because ultimately, unless you're going to hit the portal for a bunch of freshmen, what you're looking for are guys who can be foundational pieces for you for 2 or 3 years before they ideally get drafted, because that means they were really, really good and really, really talented. Or in some cases, 4 years if you've got a guy who's just a really good college player. But the point is, you want somebody who's going to be around for 2, 3, 4 years, because not only does that mean you're getting multiple years of production out of them, that's also how you develop leaders. Now, A&M, I think, has gotten, I don't want to say lucky, but has been fortunate to, and probably puts an emphasis on, recruiting some guys who are in Kentucky too, who are equipped to be leaders right away. Guys who are older, mature, have those leadership qualities. So that is something you can recruit in the portal, but it's hard, man, because like you just never know how it's going to fit. Rosters are like a science experiment, and when you throw all these elements together, you don't know how they're going to react with each other until they're together. So that is kind of hard. But if you recruit out of high school, you can develop leaders over time. I think of Devin Burks for Kentucky, right? I mean, like, redshirted his freshman year, his first year on campus. So, but has become one of the best leaders in the country, and that's largely just because he's been around, and he knows what is required and all that stuff. So that's where high school players, in addition to being multiple year stars, come in handy is the leadership piece. All right, folks, that's going to do it for this edition of Weekend Waypoints, production of SEC Extra and D1Baseball.com. Again, programming note, tomorrow morning we'll do more preview stuff for Tennessee, Texas A&M. So we will deep dive a little bit into that. And by then we will have, these press conferences today kind of behind us. We'll have, I'm sure, a pitching matchup, at least for the opener. We'll have updates injury-wise for A&M and for Tennessee, by the way, like Hunter Inslee. Is a guy who's a little bit banged up. So we'll have that. So we'll just have a lot more information tomorrow. We'll dive into that matchup tomorrow morning and get you ready for the CWS Finals, which should be a heck of a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to them. I hope you are as well. All right. Enjoy our last first of all, this was our last Friday Weekend Waypoints. How about that? Made it through the whole season of Fridays. But yeah, so enjoy today. I hope the weather is as good where you are as it is here in Omaha. Last day off before the CWS Finals begin tomorrow, and I will talk to you then. Have a good one, everybody.